Good evening, my name is Alejo Ruiz.
Buenas tardes, quiero darles la bienvenida a todos desde Rosario y quiero agradecerles por participar de estas charlas sobre qué esperar de los procesos que son resistentes a la fungicida de Neil Havis y Carlos, dadas por Neil Havis y Carlos Alberto Forcelini. Durante estas presentaciones o durante las presentaciones podrán enviar preguntas en el casillero que está en el panel derecho de la pantalla. Al final de las presentaciones yo voy a plantear algunas de las preguntas a los oradores, teniendo en cuenta el tiempo que nos quede, y vamos a tratar de responder todas. También les recomendamos que vaya guardando las preguntas para el momento de preguntas y respuestas. Hay una parte en la página de Aapresid llamada participantes donde pueden buscar cuáles son los oradores de esta conferencia y van a poder chatear con los oradores o presentadores. No olviden de pasar por el stand de Aapresid en la galería comercial, donde encontrarán entrevistas en vivo con especialistas e información sobre todos los programas de Aapresid. Y ahora voy a presentar brevemente a los oradores. Neil Havis estudia básicamente enfermedades de los cultivos, epidemiología y diseminación de las enfermedades en cereales y oleaginosas como colza. En los últimos 20 años trabajó en el estudio de la ramularia Forcelini, una enfermedad muy importante que afecta a la cebada. También estudia cómo mejorar nuestro conocimiento de la biología de los hongos y busca desarrollar sistemas de alarmas para los productores y nuevos métodos de control. Carlos Alberto Forcelini es ingeniero agrícola que se graduó en la Universidad de Passo Fundo en Brasil. Tiene un máster en fitopatología obtenido en la Universidad de San Pablo y un PhD en fitopatología de la Universidad de Florida. Fue profesor de fitopatología en la Universidad de Passo Fundo hasta 2018. Y en este momento es investigador en Agrotechno Research en Passo Fundo, donde investiga la epidemiología de las enfermedades en soja y trigo. Ahora vamos a empezar con las presentaciones.
Good evening, everybody. My name
Buenas tardes a todos. Yo soy
is work for SRUC in Edinburgh, and I'm going to like to give you a talk this evening on what to expect from crop disease resistance and a bit of our experience in the UK and Europe on dealing with disease resistance and plant pathogens of arable crops. Okay, I hope you can see my slides okay. So just a reminder that this is the name of my talk, and this is where I work in Edinburgh in Scotland, which is part of the UK. I'd like to start off by talking about the fungicide resistance debate. We know the fungicide resistance is eroding many of the established actives, and it's also a threat to the new ones which are coming to market. In the UK and in Europe, we're seeing an increasing amount of legislation which is reducing the number of active ingredients available to farmers and growers, again, which is presenting a challenge for effective disease control. We do have some resistance in varieties which are available, but it's a mixed picture. In some situations, we don't use the most resistant varieties, and I'll touch on that later. I'll say a bit about the principles of resistance management and how we apply them and recommend them to farmers and growers, and leave you with a kind of message on how key resistance threats could be managed or are being managed in the UK and in Europe. So in terms of resistance issues, we know there are resistance issues to many of the major group of fungicides, and we'll have them on the left hand side of this table. You can see the strobilurins, sometimes called the quinone outside inhibitor group of fungicides, the azoles, which are a widely used group of fungicides, the SDHIs, succinate dehydrogenase inhibitors. We're on the second generation of SDHI fungicides now, and although they've come to market, resistance issues are now appearing to them. The MBCs, which were used some time ago, some of the specific mildewicides, quinoxafen, mitriphenone, and chlorothalonil and fulpit. So these are two multisites at the end, and you can see there are no resistance issues with them. But on the right-hand side, you can see just an indication of some of the many diseases which we're seeing resistance issues coming to the fore in Europe. I'd like to give you a couple of case studies. The first one I'd like to talk about is Zymo triticine wheat. So Zymo is probably the major disease in wheat production in the UK and Europe. We have a history of high yielding but unfortunately susceptible varieties. So that means control of the disease has relied on the use of fungicides, and it's meant multiple applications of a limited number of chemical groups. In some parts of Europe, for example, in the wetter parts where disease pressure is high, there can be up to 4 sprays in a cropping season to try and control Zymo. In terms of resistance issues, we've seen resistance to QOI since 2003. We've seen declines in azole sensitivity, issues with the SDHI coming to the fore, and although there is new chemistry coming along, and possibly in the next 2-3 years, we have to think carefully about how we're going to protect this new chemistry going forward. So to start off with, I'll talk about resistance to azoles. So this is a graph showing the decline in efficacy of 2 of the major azoles, prothioconazole and epoxiconazole, against Zymo triticine wheat. You can see on the left-hand side of the graph we have percentage control of Septoria, and around about 2000, when both the fungicides were new to the market, especially prothioconazole, we were getting around about 80% control if you put on a full dose of a protectant spray. Go across to the right-hand side of the graph and you can see by 2018, for epoxiconazole you're down to about 20% control, and for prothioconazole you're down to about 40%. So farmers have to be aware of the level of control they're going to get from their fungicide when they apply it, and they need to think about the weakness of this fungicide when they're devising their program. These are some graphs showing you the change in the efficacy of the SDHI fungicides over time. So the top set of graphs, I hope you can see them. This is Imtrex, this is fluxapyroxad, this is the SDHI from BASF. This 2013, there are 3 lines on this graph. They show the worst control achieved, they show the best control achieved, and the dark line is the average control achieved. So you can see in 2013 with Imtrex, the average control was nearly 100%. So this was great for farmers that had a very effective product they could use in their control programs. But again, as we move across to 2018, you can see that average control is down to 60%. So it's showing the appearance of mutations, which is reducing the efficacy of this fungicide. Just for a comparator, we give you the graphs for Vertizan, which is penthylpyrad, another SDHI marketed by Corteva. And again, you can see that shift from 2013. We are around about 90-95% control, and to 2018, where your average control is around about 40%. So if your fungicide is becoming weaker, you need to think about how you're going to protect that when you devise your program. So we've talked about briefly the appearance of mutations, which has reduced the efficacy of fungicides, but I just wanted to point out something we've observed from looking at the sensitivity of isolates in lab testing. This graph shows the frequency and the EC50 values, or the effective dose, that is the fungicide concentration required to control the growth of the fungus by 50%. If you look on the graph, you can see these blue diamonds, which represent 2003. So the EC50 values is 0.001 parts per million. So it shows that the pathogen population is very sensitive to this fungicide. If you scroll across, you can see these figures moving increasingly to the right. So it's taking more fungicide to control the growth of the fungus. We can see the pink symbols we have as 2018, but then there are black bars, I hope you can see that there, which represent 2019. And what we've seen is a move in the sensitivity of the pathogen back towards being more sensitive. In the UK and in Europe in 2018, we had a very warm and a very dry summer. We think that some of these mutations in the fungus confer a fitness penalty. So we think that what's happened is that these mutated isolates have not survived that warm, dry conditions. So as well as having selection pressure from the fungicides that you spray onto your crop, please don't forget the environment can have a selection pressure as well. Okay, so we wait to see if this is a stable change back towards being more sensitive, or if this is just a one-off, and we'll see what results we get from the 2020 testing. So what kind of evidence have we used to focus or build on our advice to farmers? There was a paper published in 2014 where an eminent pathologist, Frank van den Bosch, looked at all the papers which had been published on selection pressure in terms of fungicides and pathogens. And he looked at some of the factors such as increasing the dose, increasing the spray number, splitting the dose. And he found, you can see the figures in red in the table, that majority of papers indicate that these activities actually increase the selection. If you looked at things like adding a mixture partner or alternating or replacing sprays, they actually decreased selection. So this formed the basis of our advice going forwards to farmers. Focus on these areas where you can add mixture partners and alternate and replace sprays. Okay, and try and get away from increasing the dose, the spray number, or even splitting the dose, because that's not going to give you, it's going to cause a selection pressure on your pathogen. Second case study I'd like to talk about is disease resistance in barley. Here we have multiple disease targets. We have a greater number of active groups available for farmers. Traditionally, barley crops have a lower input than wheat, so I talked about 4 potential timings in wheat. In barley, we really go beyond 3 at the very most. And unfortunately, there's been a history of a slow uptake of the more disease-resistant varieties, especially in Scotland, where we have a very strong end user who can dominate the selection of variety, which means we can end up growing fairly weak or not very disease-resistant varieties because they are what the end user wants. We've seen issues in terms of disease resistance with net blotch, mildew, rhynchosporium, and ramularia, and I'll talk a bit about these in the next few slides. As we've seen in the situation with wheat, the decline in efficacy of fungicides, here's the situation with rhynchosporium. So the QOI fungicides, or Pyraclostrobin as an example, when it first came to the market, was very effective against rhynchosporium. You can see from this graph a full label dose of Pyraclostrobin in 2001 would give you around about 80% control. And we've got to this situation now, 2017, with the same amount of fungicide only gives you around 40% control. We don't think this is the result of the G143A mutation in the pathogen, because we're not seeing a complete collapse in control. We're seeing a more gradual decline. So we think this is related to other mutations in the fungus. We know that the G143 mutation in rhynchosporium, it's proposed that it actually carries a severe fitness penalty. So even if the mutation does appear, it may not survive the winter. And that's actually what's been observed in France, where the mutation was picked up in 2007 in barley crops, and when the researchers went back to the same field the next year, they couldn't detect it. And again, it's a situation where we think is the pathogen which did have the mutation did not survive the winter. So net blotch Pionophyteres, this is another major pathogen of barley crops. We have seen a shift in terms of the efficacy of fungicides against this pathogen. So on the left-hand side, these are fungicide performance curves produced in the UK, funded by the Levy Board, and the idea is they give some independent evidence for farmers on the efficacy of control they can expect from the use of a fungicide. And to do these trials, a susceptible variety is grown. There is a one application date of fungicide, and a number of different doses are applied, either a quarter rate, half rate, full dose, or even a double dose, just to produce a curve. And the disease incidence is measured in the crop, and you're able to calculate and show on a nice curve what kind of disease control you can get. So you can see the curves on the left-hand side. These are results from 2014 and 15, and you can see the significant disease control from all of the fungicides being tested. Even a half dose gives you almost a complete reduction in terms of disease. Compare that with 2016-17. Here we have a situation where you're still seeing control from prothioconazole and Pyraclostrobin, the blue and yellow lines, but if you look at Imtrex and Vertosan, the STHI fungicides, you can see that control is starting to level off. So obviously there are mutations appearing in the pathogen, which is making the fungicides less effective. Another major barley pathogen which has been an issue is ramularia, and it's often considered a lesson in how not to protect chemistry. We've grown varieties which are fairly weak in terms of resistance to ramularia. There are no currently strongly resistant varieties. I mentioned this end user preference for consistency means that a majority of the area is often a single variety, so you don't have the chance to break up the pathogen movement. And we've seen development of fungicide resistance on an unprecedented scale with this pathogen. Okay, so historically, QI resistance appeared in ramularia around about 2002, around about the same time as Zyma septoria. We've also detected MBC resistance being present, and we started to see emerging issues with SDHIs. And this came from 2014 onwards, with the first detection of single isolates with reduced sensitivity. 2015, some mutations were observed in a number of countries in Europe. 2016, we started to see this shift with the SDHI and azoles in trials. And everyone expected that with ramularia, we'd see a similar situation to Zyma septoria, a gradual decline in the efficacy of both groups, SDHI and azoles. But what happened was, in 2017, we saw a complete collapse in terms of the efficacy of these two groups of fungicides against the pathogen. This was in the UK and in Germany. It's been a mixed picture in Europe. Some countries such as Ireland and Denmark, the SDHI still retain some efficacy. So again, 2018, we had that very warm, hot, dry year. And when we looked at the results from 2019, we actually saw that we were starting to see some activity from the prothioconazole again. So the question is this just a one-off? Will we see the slide back towards complete loss of efficacy with this fungicide? Revistar XE is a new azole fungicide from BASF, methyltrifluconazole. So you can see in this graph here, Revistar does have good activity against ramularia. Bravo is chlorothalonil. It's always been the most effective fungicide against the pathogen, but unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier on, with new legislation and a reduction in active ingredients, the EU has banned the use of chlorothalonil from 2020. So going forward, control of ramularia is going to rely on the use of Revistar in high pressure situations, but also look at the use of other multisites to try and protect this product going forward. Have we learned anything from experience? Yep, sure. We think going forward, it's important for any new product coming on that we establish the baseline sensitivity, determine the normal range. It would be useful to have some kind of risk assessment and resistance management plans put in place and assessed by approving authority. We need a mix of statutory and stewardship measures, but most importantly, as pathologists and researchers, we have to remember our decisions and our advice impacts on the grower profit and also the industry return on investment. So the evidence we have to give has to be both robust and also pragmatic. So our general advice, the anti-resistant strategy is to follow the IPM principles, make use of other control measures to control pathogens, things like rotations, other products, disease resistance inherent within the crop. Make full use of alternatives. There's a lot of interest in biostimulants or disease resistance elicitors. Try and reduce our reliance on fungicides. Use as little fungicide as necessary to do the job, both in terms of dose and also the number of applications. Use a balanced mixture of products. So if you have a particularly weak product with the chance of it developing more resistance, try and balance it and use it with a stronger product. The idea is that the weakest product, use as little as possible, use your strongest product the most. Try and alternate the products, avoid multiple repeat dose programs, and try and utilize low-risk fungicides, the multisites I talked about, for example, being Fulpit is an example of a still approved multisite. But as with everything, there are difficulties in getting stewardship principles taken up in practice, and we also need to work closely with industry and make sure that industry are equal partners in terms of the strategy to manage and control resistance in crops. So I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I look forward to getting some questions from you at the end of the session, and thank you for your attention again.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to thank you all for the opportunity to participate of the Aapresid meeting 2020. And I will talk about the situation of the fungal resistance to fungicides, especially here in Brazil. My name is Carlos Alberto Forcelini. I have a graduation in agronomy and Master of Science in PhD in plant pathology. During 35 years, I work as a professor at the University of Passo Fundo in southern Brazil. And nowadays, I have a field research station working on plant pathology, mostly in plant disease epidemiology. We are located in southern Brazil, where we have three different research sites: Passo Fundo, which is it's a county in southern Brazil, Panambi, and another one in Cachoeira do Sul. These are images of our main field in Passo Fundo in the last two summer seasons, which were completely different. In 2019, we had a lot of rain, a lot of rust, big difference among spray programs, for example. And last season, to 2020, less rain, less disease, especially Asian rust, and few difference among disease management, but still would see good results from the field. The main disease we have here in southern Brazil, or in Brazil as at all, are Asian rust, powdery mildew, and the leaf spot complex composed by brown spot, septoria, for example, leaf blight, cercospora, and target spot, corinespora. In some seasons, we also have anthracnose caused by coleotrichum and white mold caused by sclerotinia. These diseases are very damaging for us in southern Brazil. You can see on this photo that we have a big difference among treated and untreated plots, and we got the numbers. We could find up to 2,700 kilograms in difference between treated and untreated plots. This shows the importance of a disease in some seasons for us. Today we will talk about fungal resistant fungicides, and this subject is concerned about single-site fungicides, which are more risky in terms of resistance. There are four main groups of single-site fungicides: the benzimidazoles from 1960, the triazoles from 1970, the strobilurins from 1990, and recently the carboxamides from 2010. All of them are from medium to high risk of resistance. And we can see in Brazil a lot of problems concerning resistance. For example, if you take the soybean crop as an example, we can see in Phacospora resistance through three groups of fungicides. In corinespora or target spot, two other cases of resistance. Recently, for cercospora in Brazil, we have a report resistant to triazoles and also strobilurins. And for coleotrichum, the causal agent of anthracnosis, we have seen some reduction in control, but we not report yet officially. In the field, you can see the resistance causing reduction in disease control. For example, in this chart here, you can see a lot of lines showing the decrease in control of Asian rust over the years caused by the fungal resistance. And when you look at the numbers, we can see that originally the control of the disease by many groups of fungicides was over to 80%, sometimes 90%. And today, for the different groups of fungicides we have, you can see disease control from 48 to 69%, or 50 to 61%, and at the most 76%. So you can see that we lost 30, 40, sometimes 50% of the control capacity caused by this increasing resistance in Brazil. And another issue is that resistance is widespread in our country. When you look at the map on the left, you can see a lot of red dots which show the dispersal of the resistant mutants for strobilurins. On the right map, you can see some transformation, some resistance going on. You can see some yellow or red dots in some parts of the country, showing an increased resistance also to new carboxamides. This problem of resistance not only restricted to Phacospora, but also to some other disease, like target spot, for example, caused by corinespora. Over the years, we have seen a decrease in efficacy of control by some carboxamides. An example here is fluxapyroxide, which was very, very good for controlling this disease, and today it is showing perhaps 50% or 60% of its original efficacy. This resistance is less widespread than we talked about Phacophthora, for example, because dispersal of coordinates per spore is not as wide as the ones from Phacophthora, especially by wind. So you can see that in some places, like here in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul, the amount of fungicide needed to control the fungus is still low, but in some others, like in Mato Grosso and Goiás, we need sometimes 10 times more. Another important example of the resistance to fungicide in Brazil is the case of Cercospora species. It was reported about 3 years ago, and nowadays we have done some monitoring. And you can see that in Brazilian map here, a lot of red dots showing that the dispersal of these resistant mutants all over the country. And when you look at some data from the monitoring studies, especially on this chart on the left, we have 3 strobilurins, for example, azoxystrobin, picoxystrobin, and trifloxystrobin. You can see that in some places, very low amounts of fungicides, almost close to zero. I mean, not close to zero, but very small amount, were able to control the fungus. But in same place, you may have isolates which require a lot more, like sometimes more than 8,000 or 9,000 micrograms per milliliter to control the same fungus. So there is a very wide range of EC values, which means the amount of fungicide we need to control that fungal population. When you look at the right, you can see that for some trials of fungicides, a similar situation, but with a lower range of EC values. We can see some values from 3 to 16, for example, micrograms per milliliter. But it's important to say that originally, when these fungicides were launched in the market, the amount needed to, or TC values needed to control the Cercospora, for example, were lower than 1. And nowadays you can see a lot more. So we are losing some fungicides, I would say more strobilurins, because of this high resistance level of Cercospora to this chemical group or this mode of action. And what happened in the field when we have this kind of resistance? We can see on the left, you have pods with a lot of symptoms from leaf blight, for example. And on those plots, we sprayed more strobimix, and strobimix combined with multicides like mancozeb or morpholin, and we still can see a lot of disease symptoms. On the right, you can see a lot less symptoms. Pods are very clean, very healthy, because we changed some of the partners here. For example, we have used more chlorothalonil or triazoles, or even we have used only those instead of still using strobimix. So because of this situation, we have seen a decrease in importance of strobilurin on the control of Cercospora leaf blight, and an increase in importance of multicides like chlorothalonil combined with good triazoles like difenoconazole or prothioconazole to control this disease at the end of season. To show some results from the field, I can bring to you all 2 trials, similar trials, but in 2 different cultivars, soybean cultivars from the last season here in Brazil. On the line above, we have used more formulations to control, for example, rust, but in the past, they were useful to control Cercospora leaf blight. And we achieved, for example, 67 bags per hectare at the end of season. And when we changed those formulations for combinations of triazole plus chlorothalonil, we were able to increase 4 bags per hectare at the final in yield because of the better control of Cercospora leaf blight. A similar situation we can see on this another cultivar, Brasmax zeus. The difference was smaller, but shows the same kind of a result. Fungal mutations are the main reason for this resistance, and I would like to explain a little bit about resistance, showing this locker here, which is in this example it's representing a very important enzyme for the fungus, for example, and you can see that the locker has a place where you can connect the key, and this place is called the action site, where the fungicide or the key is able to connect and interfere on that enzyme functions. When, the main cause of resistance are changes on this action site, so that the key will not be able to connect perfectly or properly. But there are other ways for the fungi to get resistance. For example, they may increase the production of the enzyme inhibited by the fungicide in order to compensate part of it. They also can increase the capacity of or getting rid of the fungicides, or they may also use it of an alternative metabolic pathway. And usually these resistance are cross resistance. For example, when the fungus change the action site to difficult connection of the key or of the fungicide, it may affect all other fungicide compounds that share the same mode of action. For example, if a fungus develops resistance to connection of a KOI, which means a strobilurin, all strobilurins will be affected by this resistance. But the level of resistance will not be the same for all of those compounds. And an explanation for this difference in resistance levels, for example, we have a tight connection of the key or of the fungicide on the action site. Usually, we have this kind of tight connection. Those fungicides will provide a better control of disease in the field. But since the fungus can change the action site, it will be more difficult for them to connect, and in this case, the resistance level will be higher. On the other hand, we may have fungicides with small molecules, which means like a smaller key, and which provides a looser connection on the action side. May have not the best control, but still good control. In those cases, we may have a lower resistance level because these small molecules will still be able to connect on the action side, and in this case, still control the disease. So in those examples, the resistance level will be low. That explains because despite the cross resistance, we may find a level of resistance higher for some compounds and lower for some others. Another kind of resistance is that you call the multiple resistance. In this case, one fungus can be resistant to different mode of actions. For example, if you take into account Phacopsis in Brazil, it is resistant to 3 mode of actions. For example, to DMIs, triazoles, the KOIs, the strobilurins, and also the SDHIs, the carboxamides. We have also in Corinespora in Brazil, target spot, resistant to 2 mode of actions, and also for Cercospora nowadays, other 2 mode of actions. But if you look at the literature, you may find some worse examples. We can see, for example, Botrytis cinerea in strawberry already developed resistance to 6 different modes of action. So when you look at the case of multiple resistance, we think about maybe we are creating like a super fungi, which will be very hard to control in the near future. How can we manage the resistance risk? We cannot avoid it. We can really manage it. One of the best ways is the use of multi-site fungicides like mancozeb, chlorothalonil, or copper compounds, either in the formulation or in tank mix. Because they are multi-site, they connect in different enzymes, making it very difficult for the fungus to undergo such a number of mutations to become resistant. Another way that we can manage the risk of resistance, is to alternate different mode of actions. Try to set up a spray program with different compounds, alternating or rotating different mode of actions in order to not select a resistant population in the field. There is also a limit for the same mode of action during the season, usually at a maximum of 2 sprays per season of the same mode of action. Another very important thing is to spray more preventively or at the early stage of the disease. Try to avoid application on high disease levels because we will select more resistant mutants. And of course, it's very important to provide a very good spray, use of a very good spray technology. Talking about multi-site fungicides, the most important are the copper compounds, which are dating from the mid-19th century. The carbamates, like mancozeb, for example, from the mid-20th century. And more recently, but from 1960, chlorothalonil. All of them are multi-sites because they act in different enzymes, and for these reasons, they have a very low, almost zero risk of resistance. So they are very old, but they are still very effective in the field and very helpful. To show some of the benefits of using multi-sites on disease control, I bring to you all a trial we developed in Passo Fundo in this 2018 season. We have planted soybeans at seven different times from, for example, October 4th to December 13th. And we select two specific fungicides or two monocyte fungicides, like here, for example, here, triazole plus strobilurin and carboxamides plus strobilurin. And you can see that when we plant soybean earlier, we achieve very good control of the disease. But when you look as we plant soybean later, we can see a decrease on efficacy from those fungicides, from 81%, for example, down to 38%. And here from 88 down to 52%, for example. So that shows that a decrease in efficacy as you plant later, and you have more disease in the field to control, and probably more resistant mutants. When you add a multi-site fungicide to those specific fungicides, like here, for example, we add mancozeb, and in both cases, we can see that by using the multi-site, we're able to maintain a very good control of the disease, close to 76% up to the end. And on the second example, we were able to maintain the control efficacy close to 80%. Going back to the same table I brought to you earlier, I can show you here, for example, some results for control efficacy and grain yield for some formulations with multi-site fungicides. So we can see that we were able to achieve disease control from 70 to 76%. All other groups above here are specific or monocyte fungicides. You can see that the control efficacy is lower. So by using multi-sites, we can manage to have an stability in control efficacy. Based upon some results we have got in our field trials or by observing commercial fields and by looking at the situation in our country, we can suggest some treatments to control, for example, Asian rust, to control target spot or leaf blight that are safe, for example, for managing those diseases. Talking about the Asian rust, for example, we have more options of good fungicides for controlling this disease. For example, we can use strobimix combined with multisides. We can use fungicides containing carboxamides combined with multisides. We can also use triazoles like prothioconazole or tebuconazole together with multisides to control Asian rust. And more recently, you have used also morpholins to combine with multisides. So we can see that we have a lot of possibilities to control Asian rust in Brazil despite resistance, but we do need the presence of multisides in the formulation or in tank mix. Okay. When we talk about target spot, you can see that there are few options to manage this disease in a good hand. For example, we have here prothioconazole plus mancozeb or prothioconazole plus chlorothalonil. Only two options for managing this very important disease, not only in soybean, but also in cotton. And looking at the leaf blight, for example, caused by Cercospora, we can see here chlorothalonil as a multisite in all of these three options, plus difenoconazole or prothioconazole, two triazoles which are still providing good control of the disease, and some carboxamides such as fluxapyroxad or bixafen. And you can see on the last part of this table, we are no longer having here strobilurins. They may be able to provide good control in some places, some states, but in some others, the resistance level is very high to be safe with such an options. As final remarks, I would like to say that resistance cannot be avoided, but we can manage it. And one of the best ways to do it is to include more multi-site fungicides on the spray program. They are very important today, and they will continue to be very important in the near future, because even when you have a new fungicides entering the market, we'll need to protect them from the resistance. The loss in efficacy or the loss in control we have, for example, caused by the resistance, we have to compensate this loss in control by other control strategies, by including more control strategies. So you can improve disease control by using cultivars with more generic resistance to disease, by improving the spray programs, for example, starting the applications earlier, by using proper spray intervals, and of course, by using a very good spray technology. At this time, I'd like to say thank you. Muchas gracias, obrigado, especially to all of you connecting to us on this meeting, and also to all Aapresid meeting organizers. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Good evening, everybody. My name mute.
Sorry, I had it in silence. Many thanks, Neil and Carlos, for both your presentations. With fungicide resistance and at the same time with diseases breaking crop resistances. Do you think that in the near future we will be depending more on varieties resistance to control the diseases, or it will be more like a mix for any?
Okay. I think so. I think so, and I hope so. But usually farmers they look for high yielding varieties, and despite despite their susceptibility to diseases. So that's the case in Brazil. I'm following more the case in Brazil. So I have seen farmers looking for very yielding varieties instead of looking for some resistance varieties. And then that's why we rely our disease control mainly on fungicide or on chemical control. But we do have some varieties with resistance to rust, which allow us to reduce the numbers of fungicide sprays for rust. But we were not able to get good varieties with resistance to leaf spot, for example. So that's still an issue for us.
Yep, I would agree with Carlos. I think it's a long-term strategy is to have improved varieties for farmers to choose from. There's an expression in the UK, yield is king, and the farmers, so yield is everything, but we're trying to stress the importance of getting improved disease resistance in varieties. And the EU and the UK all signed up to a sustainable use directive which promotes integrated pest management, and part of that is to use fungicides only when necessary. So that means the government have to promote the use of better varieties, more disease-resistant varieties going forward.
Thanks for both your answers. And Neil, we have a couple of questions about barley. Many interest. How effective do you think anti-resistant strategies are regarding the delay of resistant development? In Argentina, we have around 80% with only one barley variety, variety. 80% of all the cropland.
Yes.
Should we expect resistant development anytime soon?
Yes, you really are pushing. Yeah, it's putting quite a selection pressure on. If you grow a susceptible variety and it dominates, we did something very similar in Scotland. In Scotland, we grow a lot of spring barley for malting to make beer and whiskey, and one variety dominates the market with 50 to 60% of the entire market, and there's no resistance, and we start to see resistance breaking down in the fungicides. It's too much. Relates back to the previous answer. You're putting too much pressure on the fungicide, and there's nothing to back it up if you keep growing susceptible variety.
Thanks. And which was the financial cost for barley farmers due to this fungicide resistance?
So in yield losses, for example, in Ramularia, you're talking about up to a ton per hectare. So it's say 170 pounds for a ton. So spring barley yields about 5-6 tons per hectare. So almost 1/5 or 1/6 of the crop being lost.
Okay, great. Thank you. And for Carlos, how important is the quality of the fungicide application in the generation of resistance?
Okay, yeah, we have two problems with a bad spray technology. For example, talking about soybeans, the plant canopy gets very closed. After a few weeks in the field, when plants start flowering, you can see a very close canopy, and we have only one fungicide sprays before that time. All others, 2 or 3 spray applications, they usually take place when the plant canopy is closed. So usually we are delivering less than 5% of the fungicide on the lower level, on the lower third of the plant canopy, and a lot more fungicides on the upper third. So we have a kind of overdoses of fungicides on the upper third, and a very, very low rate of fungicides on the lower third. So for some mode of actions, a lower fungicide amount increases the resistance risk, and for some others, for example, a very high level of fungicide can also increase the resistance risk. So we have two problems: one on the upper part of the plant, and another one on the lower third. So we believe that we should really improve the spray technology in order to deliver a better control, to deliver the fungicide on the target site, on the target part of the plants, and also to manage the risk of resistance.
Many thanks. Yes, it's like we have a double problem.
Yeah, for sure.
Bad application. For both of you, which type of pathogen or disease are more prone to have multiple resistance? Which group?
Please, Neil. You first, Neil.
Primarily, we look at the cereal diseases which have multiple generations in a season, and they have the chance to spread mutations more rapidly through the population. So anything with a polycyclic life cycle are more likely to give multiple resistance. And then Carlos gave the excellent example of Botrytis cinerea with multiple generations, and that's exactly the kind of problem you'll be looking at. So anything, if it's got a monocyclic pathogen with one slow disease cycle, far easier to control and less likely to produce these kind of problems.
When you look at oh, sorry.
Yes,
please,
sorry. No. Go, Carlos.
No,
sorry.
When you look at the resistant case we have in Brazil, we have seen both. We have seen resistance on, for example, biotrophic fungi and also necrotrophic fungi. In the case of soybean, we have Phacophthora, which is biotrophic, and you have, for example, Corynespora and Cercospora species, which are necrotrophic fungi. But I believe that both are important case of resistance. They are fungi able to get to develop resistance to fungi, to fungicide. Sorry, but we have seen a wider spread of the resistance in the case of Phacops because of it's a very, it's dispersal by the wind. The fungus is able to go far away, to be dispersed far away. So in that case, we can see a similar and very high resistance level all over the country. For other fungi, because of the dispersed by wind is somewhat lower, we can see some places with a high level of resistance, some other the same fungicides are still able to provide a good control.
Great, thanks. Neil, they asked me that in Europe, they did not renew the approval of chlorothalonil. Latin America, which will this active ingredient have? Let's see. Is there any possibility of alternatives more environmental friendly and human life than this chlorothalonil?
Yeah. So chlorothalonil lost its approval in the European Union because of concerns about there would build up in aquatic organisms. So that was the toxicity. That was the rationale for removing its approval. There's been a lot of talk in America about chlorothalonil affecting bees as well. So some concerns about that. In Europe, we still have Fulpit, which is another multi-site, and we also have Mancozeb. There is concern amongst pathologists and crop protection professionals in Europe that the European Union, and probably the UK will follow, will ban these multi-sites as well. Because, as Carlos described the modes of action, there are multiple effects on organisms, not just the target organism. And because of that, the environmental lobby is very strong in Europe, and they want these non-specific fungicides banned. So that in all likelihood, we will lose them going forward. We still have, Carlos mentioned in his talk, copper, which is an inorganic fungicide. So that's been approved by the UK government, but not by the Scottish government. So we could have a different story across Europe. Some countries approving and some not approving. But I think all the multi-sites, we are working towards the expectation that multi-sites will be lost to farmers in Europe and the UK, I'm afraid.
Great, thanks. And Carlos, I have two questions about Asian soybean rust. They're asking if it's possible that some strains can come to Argentina from Brazil. And the other question is, did you assess the effect of potassium phosphate for the control of Asian soybean rust and Cercospora?
Okay, the first part of the question, if about the possibility of Phacops, the resistant mutants move from Brazil down to Argentina. Yes, it's possible, because we have seen a lot of the fungus is able to spread everywhere, and it is possible. But I believe that because you don't have much local inoculum for this fungus, the epidemic may start very, very late in the season. So the fungus may not have time to even a resistant mutant may not have time to cause an epidemic or to cause, for example, crop losses. Okay. I missed the second part of your question about the name of it was the. Can you repeat please the name of that compound?
Yes, it's potassium phosphide. Potassium.
Okay, it's a kind of phosphite probably. Yeah, I can understand. Yeah. Okay, we have used for some phosphates, some other compounds to induce resistance on some our crops. The results sometimes are good, sometimes they are close to zero. So we cannot rely on them on our spray program. But we have seen some good results when we combine those compounds. For example, we have a basic fungicide plan, okay, and because of the resistance, we have used some multisites together. And in some places, some people say that we could replace those multisites by using phosphates, for example, or compounds to induce resistance. But the results are not the same, yeah, especially when we have severe epidemics, for example. So the best way to get good results was to combine multisites plus those compounds to induce resistance, especially on the first part of the spray program. So they show some potential, but not to replace the fungicides, but I mean not to replace the multisites, but to be combined with those multisites.
And I have two last questions about Cercospora. What for you, Carlos? What effect of succinate dehydrogenase inhibitors for the control of Cercospora, and if have Cercospora resistance reports been published in scientific journals?
Yeah, the STHIs fungicides, they are very good to control, not all of them. Some of them are specific to rust, but most of them are very good fungicides to control Cercospora species, for example. But in Brazil, usually Cercospora is a problem at the end of the crop cycle, at the end of soybean cycle. And usually we have used the STHIs early in the season to prevent rust. And there is a maximum of two sprays of those fungicides per season. So usually farmers in our researches, and we research, we prefer to use STHIs early in the season to prevent rust, to prevent some other leaf spots, for example, and instead of keeping them for the end of the season to control, for example, for controlling Cercospora. Usually we have used more strobimix for controlling Cercospora, but today, because of the resistance, we are switching the partners for that strobimix. Instead of using mancozeb, for example, we have used chlorothalonil, or even some trials also like difenoconazole to provide a good control. Yeah, to help those strobimix to provide a good control of Cercospora. So SHIs are more useful for us on the first part of the spray program to prevent rust.
Great, thank you. And the last question for you, Neil. Which is your vision about the use of mancozeb alone or in mixes with multi-site fungicides? It use is a good strategy to mitigate resistance.
Yeah, we would, as I said in my talk, we would always advocate looking at multi-sites to add them into a spray program to protect the single site mode of actions. Mancozeb is only approved at the moment in wheat crops. Is not approved in barley. So, excuse me, we also have another multi-site fulpit. So at the moment, fulpit looks as a slightly better replacement early on in the program to partner with the single site fungicides. Mancozeb comes into its own. It's particularly more effective at controlling Fusarium head blight in wheat. So at the T3 spray timing, we call it after the year has emerged, Mancozeb is particularly useful at that point. So yes, we would ask farmers to consider using Mancozeb, but at the moment it's only in wheat. The company have looked in, one of the manufacturers has looked into asking for an approval for barley, but the results from trials have not been particularly promising, so that's why they've not proceeded with that.
Well, many thanks, Carlos and Neil, for both your presentations and time. We will also want to thank all the audience, and well, if you want to add something, you can do it.
Okay, sorry, Neil, please.
No, you go first, Carlos.
Okay, thank you. I would say thanks to all of you, and my pleasure to know all of you. It's an honor for me, especially to know you, Neil, and
Yes.
also to thank all of you connect to us this evening for the opportunity to exchange some information, some knowledge about this very important issue.
And I'd like to thank the organisers for the kind invitation, for Cynthia for helping organise everything. And as I say, it's a pleasure to meet you all and speak and talk about this interesting subject to us. And I hope the rest of the conference goes well for you all.